All right, so let's dive into one of those really important but kind of tricky parts of contract law, the Parol Evidence Rule. It's the rule that basically decides which promises actually count when a deal starts to go wrong.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever been there? You're hashing out a deal, you agree on something super important, maybe even shake on it, but then you get the final, formal contract, and that promise, it's just gone. It happens way more often than you'd think.
And yeah, this is where you hit a classic contract problem. It's the spoken word versus the written one. So when they clash, which one does the law actually put its trust in?
Okay, let's paint a picture to make this super clear. Imagine you're buying some new equipment. You and the seller agree on the price, and to sweeten the deal, they promise you free delivery. You shake hands, but when the official contract shows up, the price is there, perfect, but there's not a single word about that free delivery.
And then, bam, a few weeks later, an unexpected invoice for shipping costs shows up. You immediately call them up, reminding them of their promise, but the seller just points back to the contract, which says nothing about it. So what gives? When it comes to a dispute, which one wins? The handshake or the fine print?
Well, the answer comes down to a really fundamental principle in contract law, often called the four corners rule. Its whole purpose, really, is to bring a sense of certainty and finality to written agreements. And this isn't just some vague idea. It's got a solid legal foundation, and here's a quote from a big case. The court's goal is to prevent what they call extrinsic, or outside evidence, from messing with a signed document. In other words, they want to trust what's written down inside the four corners of the page, not all the chatter that happened beforehand.
The official name for this whole idea is the Parol Evidence Rule, and it starts with a really simple assumption. If you went to all the trouble of writing down and signing a contract, you probably intended for that document to be the final, complete, whole agreement, free delivery promise or not.
Now here's a great way to picture this. Imagine your written contract is a fortress. The Parol Evidence Rule? That's the guard standing at the main gate. And his only job is to stop all that extrinsic evidence, the prior discussions, the earlier email drafts, the verbal side deals, from getting inside the walls and changing the terms.
So what exactly is this guard blocking? Well, have a look. Those verbal promises you made over coffee, usually they're out. The back-and-forth emails with different pricing terms, they're out too. The rule's job is to keep out all those negotiations that happened before the final signature, and only admit the evidence found within the four corners of the document itself.
Okay, so this sounds pretty black and white, right? It definitely creates certainty. But what happens when that written document genuinely wasn't meant to be the final word? What if the paper really isn't the whole story? And that brings us to the really interesting part, the exceptions to the rule. You can think of these as, well, open doors. They're pathways that allow that outside evidence to be heard when it's clear something important was left out.
The entire foundation for these exceptions comes down to one key idea. The Parol Evidence Rule only kicks in if both sides intended for the written contract to be the be-all and end-all. If you can prove it wasn't, then that guard at the gate just steps aside.
So, when do these doors actually open up? Well, you might be able to show the agreement was only partly written down. Or, and this is a big one, you could try to prove there was a separate but related collateral contract. So, going back to our example, you could argue that the free delivery promise was its own distinct side deal, and that it was the very thing that convinced you to sign the main contract in the first place.
So how do you check for one of these open doors? It's kind of a simple two-step thought process. First, you have to ask, was this piece of paper really meant to be the final word on everything? If the answer is maybe not, that door is already ajar. And second, was there a separate, distinct promise that basically induced you to sign the main deal? If so, you might have a solid argument for a valid collateral contract.
Okay, so we've got the fortress on one side and these potential open doors on the other. Let's put these two competing ideas side by side and really get the complete picture.
This table just sums up that core tension perfectly. The rule is all about certainty and finality. It sees the contract as a complete, sealed document. The exception, on the other hand, is about acknowledging reality, recognizing that sometimes the paper doesn't tell the whole story. So the rule blocks prior verbal agreements, while the exception can allow evidence of something like a collateral agreement.
So what's the bottom line here? It's this. The law really wants certainty. So the Parol Evidence Rule is a powerful shield for written contracts. But, and this is the important part, it isn't unbreakable. That shield will bend when there's compelling proof that the written document was never intended to be the final word.
And that really leaves us with one critical question to ask yourself the next time you're about to sign on the dotted line.
Is your contract story fully written? Is every single promise that matters to you inside the four corners of that document? You know, this is exactly why so many contracts have what's called an entire agreement clause. It's basically the legal way of slamming that fortress case shut. Because as we've seen, once the ink is dry, any promise left outside that fortress, well, it might just vanish into thin air.